Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to another Jane Austen July video. Today I'm going to be talking about my favourite moments and scenes in Jane Austen's books. So, I thought this might be a fun video to do this Jane Austen July. Somebody a while back requested in the comments that I make a video about my favourite scenes or my favourite moments in literature. And I thought, well, that would be very, very hard to do without spoilers. But then it occurred to me that I could do that kind of video about Jane Austen because I feel like enough people have read all of Jane Austen's novels that I feel relatively comfortable doing a very spoilery video about Jane Austen. So today I'm going to be talking about my favourite scenes in Jane Austen. I have scenes from all of Jane Austen's main 6 novels, plus one from one of her unfinished works. There will be spoilers in this video. Not really a spoiler for the Watsons, the unfinished work, but for Jane Austen's main 6 novels, there will be spoilers. Quite big spoilers for some of them especially, so unless you've read all of Jane Austen's works, I wouldn't recommend watching this video. But if you have, welcome. I'm going to talk about some of my favourite moments in Jane Austen. I love Jane Austen's books so much, and I've read them all many times, and I'm sure I will think of many more great moments and scenes the moment I finish filming this, but I thought it would be fun to take a look at some of my favourite scenes in Jane Austen. I am going to quote from / read from quite a few of these, so this might be quite a quote heavy video / reading at you heavy video, but hopefully that is still fun. So okay, so the first scene I want to mention is actually from The Watsons, which is one of Jane Austen's unfinished novels, and one that I really enjoy. I so wish she had finished The Watsons. I think it would have been fantastic. But anyway, there's a really lovely moment in chapter 2 where the main character, Emma Watson, is at a ball and sees that a little boy who has been brought along by his mother doesn't have anyone to dance with. And I just always love this moment because I think it's really sweet. So I'm going to read it to you. So the little boy is expecting to dance soon with another member of his party, a young lady called Miss Osborne. "Oh yes, we have been engaged this week," cried the boy, "and we are to dance down every couple." On the other side of Emma, Miss Osborne, Miss Carr, and a party of young men were standing engaged in a very lively consultation, and soon afterwards she saw the smartest officer of the set walking to the orchestra to order the dance, while Miss Osborne, passing before her to her little expecting partner, hastily said, "Charles, I beg your pardon for not keeping my engagement, but I am going to dance these 2 dances with Colonel Beresford. I know you will excuse me, and I will certainly dance with you after tea." And without staying for an answer, she turned again to Miss Carr, and in another minute was led by Colonel Beresford to begin the set. If the poor little boy's face had in its happiness been interesting to Emma, it was infinitely more so under this sudden reverse. He stood the picture of disappointment, with crimsoned cheeks, quivering lips, and eyes bent on the floor. His mother, stifling her own mortification, tried to soothe him with the prospect of Miss Osborne's second promise, but though he contrived to utter with an effort of boyish bravery, "Oh, I do not mind it," it was evident by the unceasing agitation of his features that he minded it as much as ever. Emma did not think or reflect. She felt and acted. "I should be very happy to dance with you, sir, if you like it," said she, holding out her hand with the most unaffected good humour. The boy, in one moment restored to all his first delight, looked joyfully at his mother, and stepping forwards with an honest, simple "Thank you, ma'am," was instantly ready to attend his new acquaintance. I just think that is one of the loveliest moments in Austen for its just supreme sweetness. And I always enjoy that moment a great deal in The Watsons. I do like so much about The Watsons. I really like Emma Watson as a character, and yes, I am so sad that Jane Austen didn't finish that one. Next, I want to mention a couple of moments from Northanger Abbey, and the first one I want to talk about is a little bit from chapter 5, where Jane Austen goes on a little tangent, shall we say, about novels and the importance of novels. The progress of the friendship between Catherine and Isabella was quick as its beginning had been warm. They called each other by their Christian name, were always arm in arm when they walked, pinned up each other's train for the dance, and were not to be divided in the set. And if a rainy morning deprived them of other enjoyments, they were still resolute in meeting in defiance of wet and dirt, and shut themselves up to read novels together. Yes, novels. For I will not adopt the ungenerous and impolite custom so common with novel writers of degrading by their contemptuous censure the very performances to the number of which they are themselves adding, joining with their greatest enemies in bestowing the harshest epithets on such works and scarcely ever permitting them to be read by their own heroine, who, if she accidentally take up a novel, is sure to turn over its insipid pages with disgust. Alas, if the heroine of one novel be not patronised by the heroine of another, from whom can she expect protection and regard? I am no novel reader. I seldom look into novels. Do not imagine that I often read novels. It is very well for a novel. Such is the common cant. And what are you reading, miss? Oh, it is only a novel, replies the young lady, while she lays down her book with affected indifference or momentary shame. It is only Cecilia or Camilla or Belinda, or, in short, only some work in which the greatest powers of the mind are displayed, in which the most thorough knowledge of human nature, the happiest delineation of its varieties, the liveliest effusions of wit and humour are conveyed to the world in the best chosen language. I love that in Northanger Abbey, which is in many ways a book about books and about the influence of reading, I love that Jane Austen just like goes off on a wonderful, glorious, angry tangent about the way novels are perceived by the society that she lives in. I find it really, really fun. Another bit I really love is in chapter 15 when John Thorpe is flirting with Catherine Morland and she is just completely oblivious. In general, John Thorpe is one of my favourite characters in Northanger Abbey. Obviously, I don't like him because he is awful, but I do love how awful he is, and he is one of those characters I love to hate and that I find completely hilarious. I think there are some great moments between him and Catherine where he is trying really hard to flirt at her and she doesn't notice at all. And one of these moments comes in chapter 15. "Shall you not be late at devices?" said Catherine. He made no answer, but after a minute's silence burst out with, "A famous good thing, this marrying scheme, upon my soul. A clever fancy of Morland's and Bell's. What do you think of it, Miss Morland? I say it is no bad notion." "I'm sure I think it a very good one." "Do you? That's honest, by heavens. I am glad you are no enemy to matrimony, however. Did you ever hear of the old song, 'Going to one wedding brings on another'? I say, you will come to Belle's wedding, I hope." "Yes, I have promised your sister to be with her, if possible." And then, you know, twisting himself about and forcing a foolish laugh, "I say, then, you know, we may try the truth of that same old song." "May we? But I never sing. Well, I wish you a good journey. I dine with Miss Tilney today. I must now be going home." I really enjoy John Thorpe's, like, bad attempts at sort of half proposing to Catherine by allusions to his sister and her brother getting married. But I also really enjoy that Catherine is completely oblivious and just answers him really frankly. I think that sums up really well both like Catherine's naivety, but also her like dislike of pretense and how sort of straightforward and honest and down to earth she is in a way that lots of people aren't. John Thorpe is all kind of pretend gallantry and words that don't really mean that much, whereas Catherine just kind of speaks what she means, and I really like that scene very much. Okay, I'm going to move on to Sense and Sensibility, where I have a couple more scenes. My initial intention had been to choose 2 scenes from each novel, but that didn't last very long. Anyway, in Sense and Sensibility, one of my absolute favourite bits is in chapter 3, where John Dashwood, the half-brother of Eleanor and Marianne, is talking to his wife about what to do for his sisters after their father's death. And she slowly but surely persuades him to do absolutely nothing for them. I think it is such a masterful piece of dialogue that really shows Jane Austen like at her absolute best. It is so clever and hilarious, but also like so sneaky and mean, and I just think it works really, really well. "There is no knowing what they may expect," said the lady, "but we are not to think of their expectations. The question is what you can afford to do." "Certainly, and I think I may afford to give them £500 apiece. As it is, without any addition of mine, they will each have about £3,000 on their mother's death. A very comfortable fortune for any young woman." "To be sure it is. And indeed, it strikes me that they can want no addition at all. They will have £10,000 divided amongst them. If they marry, they will be sure of doing well, and if they do not, they may all live very comfortably together on the interest of £10,000. "That is very true, and therefore I do not know whether, upon the whole, it would not be more advisable to do something for their mother while she lives." And slowly over the course of the scene, Fanny Dashwood just like completely wears down her husband into changing his mind in a very sneaky way, and I just feel like this tells us so much about both of their characters and is such a wonderful scene. I do feel like a lot of my favourite scenes in Jane Austen are like either the really like emotionally intense ones or the absolutely hilarious ones. I do love a lot of Jane Austen's comic moments. Another scene I really love in Sense and Sensibility is chapter 31, which is the scene in which Colonel Brandon explains his past love story and the tragic end of that to Eleanor. And I really love this, partly because I think it's really interesting to learn more about Colonel Brandon, who I like as a character a lot, and partly because I think it's it's an interesting story, the story he tells of his life and of his love for Eliza. But also, I think it's a really nice moment of Eleanor and Brandon's friendship, which is something I really like in Sense Sensibility. I know I've said before that Sense Sensibility is, for me, less of a love story than other books by Jane Austen. It is really, to me, a story about family and about siblings. And I love not only the sibling relationships, but also the sort of surrogate sibling relationships, the relationships between people and their potential future siblings-in-law. And I really like the sort of friendship and quasi-sibling relationship between Eleanor and Brandon, and this is a really good scene for developing that. I also feel that in this scene, Jane Austen just like shows Colonel Brandon's emotion really, really well. I'll read one tiny bit from the scene because it's such a long scene and I didn't really know what bit to quote from, but I think Brandon's like hesitation about telling the story and its links to Willoughby to begin with, like really shows a lot about his personality and his emotional state in a really clever way. You only have to look at how many dashes are in this first speech to like know that he is really stumbling over his words and really struggling to tell the story and to bear this much of his heart. My object, my wish, my sole wish in desiring it, I hope, I believe it is to be a means of giving comfort. No, I must not say comfort, not present comfort, but conviction, lasting conviction to your sister's mind. My regard for her, for yourself, for your mother, will you allow me to prove it by relating some circumstances which nothing but a very sincere regard, nothing but an earnest desire of being useful, I think I am justified, though where so many hours have been spent in convincing myself that I am right, is there not some reason to fear I may be wrong? I just really like Colonel Brandon and everything that sort of passage says about him. Another wonderful chapter in Sense Sensibility, one of my favourite chapters in the whole of Jane Austen actually, is chapter 44, where Willoughby comes to see the Dashwood sisters while Marianne is ill and talks to Eleanor and tries to explain himself. I love this scene because I think it really complicates Willoughby. I made a video all about Willoughby as a character. I'll leave that link down below because I think I talk about this a lot more there. I mean, it was quite a few years ago now, but I feel like I spoke a lot about this chapter in that video, and about my complicated feelings towards Willoughby. I find him a really interesting character because in many ways, obviously, he is exceptionally dislikable and he is not a good person, but I think he is a more complicated character than someone like Wickham. I think Wickham is like amoral. Like, I don't think Wickham has any care for anyone but himself. I don't think Wickham even has a concept of morality. Whereas I feel like Willoughby is immoral more than amoral. Like, I feel like Willoughby does know right from wrong. He just doesn't prevent himself from doing wrong. And I also feel like Willoughby has more of a heart. Like, he genuinely cares for and loves Marianne, but he doesn't care for her more than he cares for himself, and he is not someone who is used to putting other people before himself. And I think chapter 44 of Sense Sensibility is just a wonderful chapter in showing the complications of Willoughby's character, and in showing that he is a complicated figure, but also such a selfish one. And there are so many moments where he says something and you feel quite sorry for him, and then he says something else and you're like, oh no, Willoughby, you are terrible. But I think his speeches and his story and the way he sort of like asks a lot of questions to Eleanor, like rhetorical questions, like the way that he speaks just really all goes to show his character and his selfishness. I feel like I could read this whole chapter, so I'll just read one little bit, one exchange between Eleanor and Willoughby. "You are very wrong, Mr. Willoughby, very blamable," said Eleanor, while her voice, in spite of herself, betrayed her compassionate emotion. "You ought not to speak in this way, either of Mrs. Willoughby or of my sister. You made your own choice. It was not forced on you. Your wife has a claim to your politeness, to your respect, at least. She must be attached to you, or she would not have married you. To treat her with unkindness, to speak of her slightingly, is no atonement to Marianne, nor can I suppose it a relief to your own conscience. Do not talk to me of my wife," he said with a heavy sigh. "She does not deserve your compassion. She knew I had no regard for her when we married. Well, married we were, and came down to Combe Magna to be happy, and afterwards returned to town to be gay. And now do you pity me, Miss Dashwood, or have I said all this to no purpose? Am I, be it only 1 degree, am I less guilty in your opinion than I was before? My intentions were not always wrong. Have I explained away any part of my guilt?" And I kind of love that section because we see not only Willoughby's like complete self-pity, but also how much it matters to him what Eleanor thinks of him, how much it matters to him what people think of him, because it's important to his like self-respect and to his selfishness. And I think that's just a really interesting moment. Now I want to talk about some of my favourite moments from Pride and Prejudice, which I had trouble narrowing down because I love this book so much and there are so many moments. Basically every single moment in Pride and Prejudice is my favourite moment. But anyway, a couple of chapters that I really, really love are chapters 19 and 20, where we have Mr. Collins's proposal and its aftermath. And I just really love the ridiculousness of Mr. Collins' proposal, how it is both like absolutely hilarious, but also like so awkward and miserable because Elizabeth has to deal with this and has to turn him down and has to deal with the painfulness of this, as well as being like quite amused herself, which is exactly the feeling that the reader is meant to have, and I just think that works so well. I'm going to read a tiny bit just because I find Mr. Collins absolutely hilarious always. Before I run away by my feelings on this subject, perhaps it will be advisable for me to state my reasons for marrying, and moreover for coming into Hertfordshire with the design of selecting a wife, as I certainly did. The idea of Mr. Collins, with all his solemn composure, being run away with by his feelings, made Elizabeth so near laughing that she could not use the short pause he allowed in any attempt to stop him farther, and he continued, "My reasons for marrying are, first, that I think it right for every clergyman in easy circumstances, like myself, to set the example of matrimony in his parish. Secondly, that I am convinced it will add very greatly to my happiness. And thirdly, which perhaps I ought to have mentioned earlier, it is the particular advice and recommendation of the very noble lady whom I have the honour of calling patroness." I just find everything about the proposal very, very funny, and I think it is so exceptionally skillfully done. And it's one of those like wonderful moments where Jane Austen combines humour with social criticism, because, you know, here is a scene in which Elizabeth tells Mr. Collins several times, "No, I do not want to marry you," and he says, "Oh, I'm sure you're just being polite. I'm sure you're just being ladylike and modest. I'm sure you do want to marry me, really," and won't take no for an answer. And I feel like the way Jane Austen uses that to show kind of the lack of power and agency women have within courtship is really great, as well as it being a hilarious scene. I also love the aftermath in the next chapter, especially the exchange between Elizabeth and her parents. Mrs. Bennet says she will never see Elizabeth again if she doesn't marry Mr. Collins, and her father tells her, "An unhappy alternative is before you, Elizabeth. From this day you must be a stranger to one of your parents. Your mother will never see you again if you do not marry Mr. Collins, and I will never see you again if you do." I have very complicated feelings about Mr. Bennet. I will leave my video down below about Mrs. Bennet, where I think I spoke about some of that. I do love doing videos where I talk extensively about one Jane Austen character, but anyway, I have very complicated feelings about Mr. Bennet. I don't think he is a good father or a good husband, and I think that sometimes his wit can make us as readers blind to his cruelty at times, and his negligence. However, I do love that moment so much, and I love the fact that when Elizabeth needs him, and I think especially at this point in time, you know, the idea of like duty and obedience to your parents is very strong, and therefore the fact that Elizabeth's father says to her, "Oh no, I don't approve of this marriage," gives Elizabeth like a legitimate social reason to continue her refusal of the marriage. The fact that her father lends her support is kind of even more significant than we might think at first glance. Another chapter I love in Pride and Prejudice is chapter 29, where Elizabeth dines at Rosings and meets Lady Catherine for the first time. I love Lady Catherine. I think she's one of Jane Austen's best creations, and all of her dialogue is just like glorious. So I'm just going to read a passage from this section because I find it hilarious, and because I just love Lady Catherine, and I love that Elizabeth stands up to her. "Are any of your younger sisters out, Miss Bennet?" "Yes, ma'am, all." "All? What, all 5 out at once? Very odd. And you only the second. The younger one's out before the elder are married. Your younger sisters must be very young." "Yes, my youngest is not 16. Perhaps she is full young to be much in company. But really, ma'am, I think it would be very hard upon younger sisters that they should not have their share in society and amusement, because the elder may not have the means or inclination to marry early. The last born has as good a right to the pleasures of youth as the first, and to be kept back on such a motive, I think it would not be very likely to promote sisterly affection or delicacy of mind." "Upon my word," said her ladyship, "you give your opinion very decidedly for so young a person. Pray, what is your age?" "With 3 younger sisters grown up," replied Elizabeth, smiling, "your ladyship can hardly expect me to own it." Lady Catherine seemed quite astonished at not receiving a direct answer, and Elizabeth suspected herself to be the first creature who had ever dared to trifle with so much dignified impertinence. Just glorious. What a moment, what a moment. Another moment I love from Pride and Prejudice, there will be quite a few from this book, is Mr. Darcy's first proposal. Partly because I think it's such a great scene and combines sort of a lovely, well, a complicatedly lovely romantic moment with, like, amazing tension. But also I do love a rejected proposal scene, especially, like, where we know they're actually gonna get together later. I can think of a few other books where such things occur, and I always really, really enjoy them. And of course we have the sort of great moment, the great line, the famous line, "In vain I have struggled, it will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell me how ardently I admire and love you," which is great and combines all of Mr. Darcy's, like, messy pride with his genuine emotion. But then we have the reaction to that too. Elizabeth's astonishment was beyond expression. She stared, coloured, doubted, and was silent. This he considered sufficient encouragement, and the avowal of all that he had felt and had long felt for her immediately followed. He spoke well, but there were feelings beside those of the heart to be detailed, and he was not more eloquent on the subject of tenderness than of pride. His sense of her inferiority, of its being a degradation, of the family obstacles which judgment had always opposed to inclination, were dwelt on with a warmth which seemed due to the consequence he was wounding, but was very unlikely to recommend his suit. One thing I find interesting about this passage is that we don't get the bulk of his proposal in direct dialogue. We get a lot more of their argument after she refuses him than we do of his proposal. We don't get the words that Mr. Darcy says here, we just get Elizabeth's reflections on it. And for a long time this used to disappoint me slightly. I used to want more from this scene. But a while ago I was talking to Marissa from Blatantly Bookish, and her husband, when he read this book, had the theory that the reason why we don't get Mr. Darcy's words here is that actually maybe his words are a lot less offensive than Elizabeth frames them as, and that actually what we're seeing in this paragraph is Elizabeth's anger and her reaction to what he said, which maybe makes out what he said to be worse than it is. And maybe makes out, like, the ratio of love and pride in his speech to be more towards the pride than perhaps it is. And I'm kind of obsessed with this theory now. I kind of love that thought. So now every time I read this chapter, I think about that theory and really, really enjoy it. And of course, I love their argument. The exchange of angry words and the temper between them both is so rich to read and so enjoyable for all its tension. And I love Elizabeth's, like, closing words. From the very beginning, from the first moment, I may almost say, of my acquaintance with you, your manners impressing me with the fullest belief of your arrogance, your conceit, and your selfish disdain for the feeling of others, was such as to form that groundwork of disapprobation on which succeeding events had built so immovable a dislike, and I had not known you a month before I felt you were the last man in the world whom I could ever be prevailed on to marry. Even the Mr. Darcy, like, has his pride and his problems and has a long character arc to go on in the rest of the book. You can imagine how those words would hugely wound someone, and so I always enjoy them very much. I have another scene from Pride and Prejudice. I feel like I could have done this video just with scenes from Pride and Prejudice. Is this going to be a very long video? Possibly, but there we go. It's fine. I love chapter 43 of Pride and Prejudice, where Elizabeth visits Pemberley. There are a lot of things I love about this chapter. One thing I love is her conversation with Mrs. Reynolds, the housekeeper, and how the housekeeper's words about Mr. Darcy make Elizabeth rethink her opinion of him. The fact that someone who works for him as a servant has such respect and esteem and admiration for him and finds him easygoing to work for and finds him kind is very important to Elizabeth and tells her quite a lot about the sort of man Mr. Darcy is. And later we have the moment where Elizabeth and Darcy meet by accident in the grounds of Pemberley, and I just love the awkwardness. I feel like Jane Austen writes the awkwardness so well. As they walked across the lawn towards the river, Elizabeth turned back to look again. Her uncle and aunt stopped also, and while the former was conjecturing as to the date of the building, the owner of it himself suddenly came forward from the road which led behind it to the stables. They were within 20 yards of each other, and so abrupt was his appearance that it was impossible to avoid his sight. Their eyes instantly met, and the cheeks of each were overspread with the deepest blush. He absolutely started, and for a moment seemed immovable from surprise, but shortly recovering himself, advanced towards the party and spoke to Elizabeth if not in terms of perfect composure, at least of perfect civility. And I just thoroughly enjoy the awkwardness of the scene. I think it's so well written, and it's such a great chapter. Okay, I have one more chapter from Pride and Prejudice because, you know, it is my favourite Jane Austen, and that is chapter 56, where Lady Catherine confronts Elizabeth, and they have their sort of showdown, which is just like such an epic scene. It's such a quintessential Jane Austen scene in that it is so tense, but also so witty, but also like packed full of social criticism, especially about class, and I just love all of that stuff very, very much. Honour, decorum, prudence, nay, interest, forbid it. Yes, Miss Bennet, interest, for do not expect to be noticed by his family or friends. If you wilfully act against the inclinations of all, you will be censured, slighted, and despised by everyone connected with him. Your alliance will be a disgrace. Your name will never even be mentioned by any of us. These are heavy misfortunes, replied Elizabeth, but the wife of Mr. Darcy must have such extraordinary sources of happiness necessarily attached to her situation that she could, upon the whole, have no cause to repine. Obstinate, headstrong girl, I am ashamed of you. Is this your gratitude for my attentions to you last spring? Is nothing due to me on that score? Is this to be endured? It must not, shall not be. If you were sensible of your own good, you would not wish to quit the sphere in which you have been brought up. In marrying your nephew, I should not consider myself as quitting that sphere. He is a gentleman, I am a gentleman's daughter. So far we are equal. True, you are a gentleman's daughter, but what was your mother? Who are your aunts and uncles? Do not imagine me ignorant of their condition. Whatever my connections may be, said Elizabeth, if your nephew does not object to them, they can be nothing to you. I think what we learnt from my favourite scenes of Pride and Prejudice is that I just really, really love Lady Catherine because she is just excellent. And I also especially love it when Elizabeth stands up to Lady Catherine. I just think they have such excellent discussion between them. Next, I want to talk about a couple of my favourite moments from Mansfield Park. So one thing I really love in Mansfield Park is the trip to Southerton Court, which takes place in chapters 8 to 10, where various characters from Mansfield Park go and visit Southerton Court, which is the home of Mr. Rushworth, the future husband, the fiance of Maria Bertram. And I just feel like the chapters in Southerton are so fantastic. I don't have a specific bit to read for you, but I just feel like the trip to Southerton tells us so much about all of the people involved. We see all the flirting between Maria and Henry Crawford, all the sort of rivalry for Henry Crawford's affections between Maria and Julia, even though Maria is about to be married to someone else. All of Maria's like pride over Southerton as a place, the fact that she is sort of simultaneously claiming this is her future home while still flirting with Henry Crawford. Like, all of that tension is so good, and all of the sort of pushing of boundaries and propriety, how all of these characters are sort of following each other around the garden. I just think it works so well. And there's also this really powerful moment where Edmund and Mary Crawford kind of walk off alone together, leaving Fanny Price alone. Edmund kind of ends up leaving Fanny on her own because Fanny's tired and she wants to sit down, and he has enough like consideration for her to say, oh yes, you should take a rest, but he doesn't have enough consideration for her to stay with her, which I feel like sums up an awful lot about Edmund Bertram as a character, especially in the sections of the book where he is sort of falling in love with Mary Crawford. And I think sort of her loneliness, but also her reliance on the fact that Edmund will come back for her, I feel like tells us a lot about Fanny and her feelings for Edmund too. Whenever I think of Mansfield Park, I always think of that trip to Southerton and what a powerful section it is. Another bit I love in Mansfield Park is chapter 32, where Fanny tells her uncle Sir Thomas that she will not marry Henry Crawford. I love this scene because it really shows Fanny Price's strength. I think she's a character who a lot of readers tend to dislike because she is sort of meeker and quieter than a lot of other Jane Austen heroines, and because she has sort of quite strict, strong moral views that she imposes on other characters, which I think as a modern reader can make her feel a little bit prudish, even though I think it's not meant to. Like, within the context of Jane Austen's time, Fanny Price is principled. She's not overly moral. She just actually has morals where no one else around her really seems to. But anyway, I think Fanny Price sometimes can come across as a sort of weaker character because she doesn't have the sort of spark and wit of Elizabeth Bennet or Emma Woodhouse, but she also doesn't have like the practicality of a character like Anne Elliot. But what I really love about Fanny Price is that she is really strong in herself, and she does have a strong belief in her opinions, and she does have a strong resolution when she needs to. So I'm going to read you a bit from this scene. "You are mistaken, sir," cried Fanny, forced by the anxiety at the moment even to tell her uncle that he was wrong. "You are quite mistaken. How could Mr. Crawford say such a thing? I gave him no encouragement yesterday. On the contrary, I told him, I cannot recollect my exact words, but I'm sure I told him I would not listen to him, that it was very unpleasant to me in every respect, and then I begged him never to talk to me in that manner again. I'm sure I said as much as that and more, and I should have said still more if I had been quite certain of his meaning anything seriously. But I did not like to be, I could not bear to be, imputing more than might be intended. I thought it all might pass for nothing with him." She could say no more. Her breath was almost gone. "Am I to understand," said Sir Thomas, after a few moments' silence, "that you mean to refuse Mr. Crawford?" "Yes, sir." "Refuse him?" "Yes, sir." "Refuse Mr. Crawford? Upon what plea? For what reason?" I cannot like him, sir, well enough to marry him." Fanny's strength and determination, despite how anxious a person she is really admirable, and it's one of the things I love about her. Like, I really admire the moments when Fanny Price is strong, because she is a character who stays strong even when she finds it really, really hard to do so, and when it is almost like against her nature to do so. You know, I think there are Jane Austen characters like Emma Woodhouse and Elizabeth Bennet who are stubborn. But Fanny Price, it's not in her nature to be stubborn. But she can be when she needs to be, but it's really hard for her. And I think actually that feels quite, like, relatable in many ways, I think. And later on in this scene, like, even when Sir Thomas shouts at her and upbraids her, she will only say, "If it were possible for me to do otherwise, but I'm so perfectly convinced that I could never make him happy and that I should be miserable myself." And throughout Mansfield Park, Fanny Price sticks to this and refuses to marry Henry Crawford, even when those around her try so hard to persuade her and try to force her to do so. And I think that is one of the things I really like about Fanny Price, and that I think makes her such an interesting character. Another part of Mansfield Park I always love are the Portsmouth chapters, and especially chapters 41 and 42, when Henry Crawford comes to visit Portsmouth, and he almost seems to become a better person. Henry Crawford is a character I find really interesting in Jane Austen, because he sort of almost gets so close to being better, but he can't quite do it. And ultimately, Fanny Price is vindicated in her opinion against him. And I really like the chapters where he comes to Portsmouth, because you see Fanny Price see a different side of him and come to like him a little bit more. You know, in another novel, these chapters would be the sort of equivalent of the Pemberley chapters in Pride and Prejudice, you know, where Fanny Price is coming to see that maybe she's misjudged Henry Crawford a little bit. So that is not this novel. And in this novel, Fanny Price sticks to her beliefs and sticks to her opinions and her feelings, and sticks to her long unrequited love for Edmund, and sticks to her wish to have nothing further to do with Mr. Crawford. I love this bit at the end of chapter 42, which I think sums up Fanny Price and her, like, constancy as a character so well. The wonderful improvement which he still fancied in Mr. Crawford was the nearest to administering comfort of anything within the current of her thoughts. Not considering in how different a circle she had just seen him, or how much might be owing to contrast, she was quite persuaded of his being astonishingly more gentle and regardful of others than formerly. And, if in little things, must it not be so in great? So anxious for her health and comfort, so very feeling, as he now expressed himself and really seemed, might it not be fairly supposed that he would not much longer persevere in a suit so distressing to her? Fanny Price sees that Henry Crawford has improved, and the first thing she thinks is, if he is really becoming a better man, he will leave me alone. And I just kind of think that's great. So, yeah. Love Fanny Price a lot. I've picked out quite a few scenes from Emma, partly because I'm reading it at the moment, and as I'm listening to it, I just keep, like, thinking about how great a book it is. It has never been my favourite Jane Austen novel, because I find Emma a slightly frustrated character, but I, in some ways, do think it is one of Jane Austen's best, and I do think it is fantastically drawn, and there are so many amazing moments in it. One bit that I love is chapter 15, the Christmas party, and then Mr. Elton's proposal. The moment Emma realises that she has been wrong, and then maybe she, you know, shouldn't trust her own judgment so well. Actually, I feel like a lot of my favourite moments in Emma are moments when Emma either realises she is wrong or is wrong and doesn't realise it. I clearly just like it when Emma's wrong, because, as I said, I do get very frustrated with her as a character, though I also enjoy her. And I just really enjoy Mr. Elton's proposal to Emma. I think I quite like comic proposals. Mr. Elton's proposal to Emma is both very, very funny, but also has its like serious social critique undertones, and especially the sort of class commentary within it, and how completely cold and dismissive Mr. Elton is of Harriet. Am I to believe that you never sought to recommend yourself particularly to Miss Smith, that you never thought seriously of her? Never, madam, cried he, affronted in turn. Never, I assure you. I think seriously of Miss Smith. Miss Smith is a very good sort of girl, and I should be happy to see her respectably settled. I wish her extremely well, and no doubt there are men who might not object to. Everybody has their level. But for myself, I am not, I think, quite so much at a loss. I need not so totally despair of an equal alliance as to be addressing myself to Miss Smith. And I feel like that complete, like, dismissal of Harriet in that scene is so, like, harsh. And in general, like, shows Mr. Elton in the sort of worst light possible. Another moment I love in Emma, one that I have literally just been reading in where I'm up to in the audiobook, is a moment in chapter 28 where Emma has called upon the Bateses, and Jane Fairfax is playing on her new piano that has been a gift to her. And Frank Churchill is there, and he is kind of talking to Jane and also talking to Emma. And Emma thinks that she and Frank are having an in-joke at Jane Fairfax's expense, where actually Frank and Jane are kind of having an in-joke at Emma's expense. And I just find it like very, very funny because, as I said, I do kind of enjoy it when Emma is much more oblivious than she realises. Emma kind of learning to understand herself better is such an important part of Emma. And although we see some of those moments sort of realization for her later, actually when you reread Emma, there are also so many moments where she has so little clue of what's going on that I think you can read and really enjoy. So I'm just going to read you this bit, which, you know, as you're in spoiler territory, you know that Jane Fairfax and Frank Churchill are engaged, but Emma does not know this, nor does she know that the piano that Jane is pretending has been a gift from the Campbells was actually a gift from Frank Churchill. He went to the pianoforte and begged Miss Fairfax, who was still sitting at it, to play some more. If you are very kind, said he, it will be one of the waltzes we danced last night. Let me live them over again. You did not enjoy them as I did. You appeared tired the whole time. I believe you were glad we danced no longer, but I would have given worlds, all the worlds one ever has to give, for another half hour. In that speech, when you're reading the book the first time, you and Emma as a reader think that he is saying he wanted to dance longer because he wanted to dance more with Emma, but actually he's saying he wanted to dance longer because he didn't get the chance to dance with Jane. She played. What felicity it is to hear a tune again which has made one happy. If I mistake not, that was danced at Weymouth. She looked at him for a moment, coloured deeply, and played something else. He took some music from a chair near the pianoforte and, turning to Emma, said, "This is something quite new to me. Do you know it? Crammer. And here is this new set of Irish melodies, that from such a quarter one might expect. This was all sent with the instrument. Very thoughtful of Colonel Campbell, was it not? He knew Miss Fairfax could have no music here. I honour that part of the attention particularly. It shows it to have been so thoroughly from the heart. Nothing hastily done, nothing incomplete. True affection only could have prompted it." Emma wished he would be less pointed, yet could not help being amused, and when on glancing her eye towards Jane Fairfax she caught the remains of a smile, when she saw that, with all the deep blush of consciousness, there had been a smile of secret delight, she had less scruple in the amusement, and much less compunction with respect to her. The amiable, upright, perfect Jane Fairfax was apparently cherishing some reprehensible feelings. So Jane is letting the world at large believe that the piano was a gift from the Campbells when it was actually a gift from Frank Churchill, but Emma thinks that it was actually a gift from Mr. Dixon, Jane's friend's husband, and Frank is letting her go along with that belief so as to not let her think that he actually sent it. So in this scene, when Emma thinks that Jane Fairfax is smiling with pleasure at the thought of Mr. Dixon having sent the piano and having picked out music she would like, Jane is actually smiling because Frank sent the piano. And what Frank is saying in that speech, sort of half addressed to Emma, but really addressed to Jane, he's saying, I've picked out music I thought you would like, as a gesture of affection. And I think especially those words, nothing hastily done, nothing incomplete. True affection only could have prompted it. And my interpretation of that is that Jane has been a bit cross with Frank for sending this, because it's such an outlandish thing to do and it's drawn suspicion, and she thinks it was unwise, and he is trying to make up for it by saying, well, I did this because I thought you would like it, because I love you. And, you know, earlier in the scene there is the mention of a dance that was danced at Weymouth, which tells us on a reread that Frank has purposely selected a piece of music that presumably they danced together at Weymouth, which is kind of cute. And I know that a lot of people really dislike Frank Churchill, but I feel like on a reread, some of the scenes between Jane and Frank where Emma is in the room misunderstanding things, I feel like you do see a lot of genuine real affection and fondness between Frank and Jane, and I kind of like their relationship, and I kind of think, like, I love that there is this other love story running beneath Emma that for me is very effective, and on a reread there are so many moments you can see between them which you just don't pick up on a first read. Maybe I need to make a whole separate video about Frank Churchill and Jane Fairfax and why I believe in their relationship and like it, and why I don't dislike Frank Churchill, and why I kind of love the love story between Frank and Jane, like, even more than the central love story of Emma. I don't know. Anyway, another great moment in Emma is, of course, chapter 43, the trip to Box Hill. We have the complicated feelings between everyone, that moment where Emma really rudely insults Miss Bates in a really, like, harsh, cruel way, and Mr. Knightley afterwards upbraids her. Was she a woman of fortune, I would leave every harmless absurdity to take its chance. I would not quarrel with you for any liberties of manner. Was she your equal in situation? But Emma, consider how far this is from being the case. She is poor, she has sunk from the comfort she was born to, and if she lived to old age must probably sink more. Her situation should secure your compassion. It was badly done indeed. You, whom she has known from an infant, whom she has seen grow up from a period when her notice was an honour, to have you now in thoughtless spirits and the pride of the moment laugh at her, humble her, and before her niece too, and before others, many of whom, certainly some, would be entirely guided by your treatment of her. This is not pleasant to you, Emma, and it is very far from pleasant to me, but I will tell you truths while I can, satisfied with proving myself your friend by very faithful counsel, and trusting that you will sometime or other do me greater justice than you can do now. While they talked, they were advancing towards the carriage. It was ready, and before she could speak again, he had handed her in. He had misinterpreted the feelings which had kept her face averted and her tongue motionless. They were combined only of anger against herself, mortification, and deep concern. Never had she felt so agitated, mortified, grieved at any circumstance in her life. She was forcibly struck. The truth of this representation there was no denying. She felt it at her heart. How could she have been so brutal, so cruel to Miss Bates? I love this moment because I think it's such a turning point for Emma and her character arc. And I feel like in the same way that Elizabeth telling Mr. Darcy that he is the last man she would ever want to marry is a turning point for his character arc to make him understand that he needs to, like, sort himself out. I feel like Mr. Knightley telling Emma off in this way, even though Emma doesn't yet really realise that she's in love with Mr. Knightley, I feel like it is his censure and his disapproval of her behaviour that makes her think, oh no, I was wrong, because she really values his opinion, and suddenly she realises that she might lose his good opinion, and that she needs to strive better to deserve it. And I feel like Emma and Mr. Darcy have very, very different personalities in many different ways, but I do feel like they have a sort of similar character arc, especially in terms of their sort of pride and snobbery needing to be taken down a peg. Emma definitely has a journey to go on over the course of the book, and I feel this is like a really key moment in that journey. Another favourite moment of mine from Emma is chapter 49, the sort of final proposal. I feel like the final proposals are not always my favourite moments of Jane Austen books, but in Emma, and also in Persuasion, which we'll talk about in a second, I think they work really, really well. There's something about Mr. Knightley and Emma's conversation here that I just really, really love. You are determined, I see, to have no curiosity. You are wise, but I cannot be wise. Emma, I must tell you what you will not ask, though I may wish it unsaid the next moment. Oh, then don't speak it, she eagerly cried. Take a little time, consider, do not commit yourself. Thank you, said he, in an accent of deep mortification, and not another syllable followed. I find it very entertaining that Emma won't let him speak because she thinks he's going to confess his love for Harriet, and when actually that is far from the truth. After proceeding a few steps, she added, I stopped you ungraciously just now, Mr. Knightley, and I'm afraid gave you pain. But if you have any wish to speak openly to me as a friend, or to ask my opinion of anything that you may have in contemplation, as a friend, indeed, you may command me. I will hear whatever you like. I will tell you exactly what I think. As a friend, repeated Mr. Knightley. Emma, that I fear is a word. No, I have no wish. Stay, yes, why should I hesitate? I have gone too far already for concealment. Emma, I accept your offer. Extraordinary as it may seem, I accept it and refer myself to you as a friend. Tell me then, have I no chance of ever succeeding? He stopped in his earnestness to look the question, and the expression of his eyes overpowered her. My dearest Emma, said he, for dearest you will always be, whatever the event of this hour's conversation. My dearest, most beloved Emma, tell me at once. Say no if it is to be said. She could really say nothing. You are silent, he cried, with great animation. Absolutely silent. At present I ask no more. Emma was almost ready to sink under the agitation of this moment. The dread of being awakened from the happiest dream was perhaps the most prominent feeling. I cannot make speeches, Emma, he soon resumed, in a tone of such sincere, decided, intelligible tenderness as was tolerably convincing. If I loved you less, I might be able to talk about it more, but you know what I am. You hear nothing but truth from me. I have blamed you and lectured you, and you have borne it as no other woman in England would have borne it. Bear with the truths I would tell you now, dearest Emma, as well as you have borne with them. The manner, perhaps, may have as little to recommend them. God knows I have been a very indifferent lover, but you understand me. I know everyone goes on about Captain Wentworth's letter, which, you know, I will talk about in a second, but I kind of think this is the best, declaration of love in all of Jane Austen. If I loved you less, I might be able to talk about it more. Is this video mostly just me reading out great bits from Jane Austen? Yes, it is. Okay. Anyway, I have a few scenes from Persuasion to wrap up this video. Have to say, Persuasion is not my favourite Jane Austen novel, and I feel like it ranks a lot less highly for me than it does for other people, but I do think it has some wonderful, wonderful moments. One moment I really love is in chapter 12, Louisa Musgrove's fall, and Wentworth's reliance on Anne afterwards. There's a great moment where Wentworth says, Anne will stay, no one so proper, so capable as Anne. And this comes after ages of Wentworth being quite cold towards Anne, and suddenly there is a moment where we see how much he values her, that even if to Anne's mind he doesn't love her anymore, he clearly has such a reliance on her capabilities and on her practicality in order to help Louisa. And I think that's such a great moment where you understand a bit more of the feelings between them. Another moment I love in Persuasion is chapter 19, where Wentworth and Anne run into each other in Bath, which has a bit of the Elizabeth and Darcy running into each other at Pemberley awkwardness. And I love the way Jane Austen writes awkwardness. I think she's just really, really good at it. Anne, as she sat near the window, descried most decidedly and distinctly Captain Wentworth walking down the street. Her start was perceptible only to herself, but she instantly felt that she was the greatest simpleton in the world, the most unaccountable and absurd. For a few minutes she saw nothing before her. It was all confusion. She was lost, and when she had scolded back her senses, she found the others still waiting for the carriage, and Mr. Elliot, always obliging, just setting off for Union Street on a commission of Mrs. Clay's. She now felt a great inclination to go to the outer door. She wanted to see if it rained. Why was she to suspect herself of another motive? Captain Wentworth must be out of sight. She left her seat. She would go. One half of her should not be always so much wiser than the other half, or always suspecting the other of being worse than it was. She would see if it rained. She was sent back, however, in a moment by the entrance of Captain Wentworth himself, among a party of gentlemen and ladies, evidently his acquaintance, and whom he must have joined a little below Milton Street. He was more obviously struck and confused by the sight of her than she had ever observed before. He looked quite red. For the first time since their renewed acquaintance, she felt that she was betraying the least sensibility of the two. She had the advantage of him in the preparation of the last few moments. All the overpowering, blinding, bewildering first effects of strong surprise were over with her. Still, however, she had enough to feel. It was agitation, pain, pleasure, a something between delight and misery. This is one of my favourite moments in the whole of Persuasion, partly, as I said, because Jane Austen writes awkwardness so well, but also partly because this is the first time Anne sees Captain Wentworth's immediate instinctive reaction to seeing her when he's not trying to guard his feelings. All of the rest of her new acquaintance with him, she has been seeing him guarding his feelings carefully, and then he meets her by surprise, and suddenly she sees that he feels as much as she does, and that maybe she has been misunderstanding things, and I just love that bit so much. But finally, my favourite moment in Persuasion has to be, of course, you know, Wentworth's letter. It was interesting when I put together my BookTuber's favourite Jane Austen novel video earlier this month. I'll leave that link down below. There was only one like scene or piece of writing that was mentioned again and again and again, and it was Wentworth's letter in Persuasion. That was mentioned by multiple people in explanation of why Persuasion was their favourite book. And there were no other books in which people mentioned like specific scenes or specific moments, but many people mentioned Wentworth's letter. And I do think it is a great moment. And actually not just the letter, but the whole discussion before it. Anne and Captain Harlow have a really interesting discussion about unrequited love, and Wentworth is like writing a letter the whole time that he hands to Anne at the end. And it is beautiful. So we'll end with Captain Wentworth's letter, and then I will finally wrap up this ridiculously long video. I can listen no longer in silence. I must speak to you by such means as are within my reach. You pierce my soul. I am half agony, half hope. Tell me that I am not too late, that such precious feelings are gone forever. I offer myself to you with a heart even more your own than when you almost broke it 8 years and a half ago. Dare not say that man forgets sooner than woman, that his love has an earlier death. I have loved none but you. Unjust I may have been, weak and resentful I have been, but never inconstant. You alone have brought me to Bath, for you alone I think and plan. Have you not seen this? Can you fail to have understood my wishes? I had not waited even these 10 days could I have read your feelings, as I think you must have penetrated mine. I can hardly write. I am every instant hearing something which overpowers me. I must go, uncertain of my fate, but I shall return hither or follow your party as soon as possible. A word, a look will be enough to decide whether I enter your father's house this evening or never. And it is great. It is a really great letter. That does have to be said. So there we go. Those are some of my absolute favourite moments in Jane Austen. I feel like a lot of them are funny moments and a lot of them are romantic moments. But in general, I do just think that Jane Austen does all moments well. I love her books so much, and I think she is very great at crafting complicated characters and making them act interesting ways in particular circumstances. And I feel like her dialogue and her writing, her wit, and her love stories are so good. So there we go. Those are some of my favourite moments in Jane Austen's books. Do let me know down in the comments what are your favourite moments and chapters within Jane Austen's novels. That's all for now. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.